In this video, I will show you how to manage stations within your Motus project. To begin, go to motus.org and then click on Manage Data. On the Management landing page, check to make sure your project you wish to work on is selected in the drop-down menu. Then, click on the link Manage Stations in the list of management tools. On this page, you'll notice three main boxes. Starting with the bottom left, you have the map, which shows the active stations in your project. You may also view a table of these stations by clicking on the tab above the map. On the top left, just above the map, you have the View and Filter options. By default, only active stations are visible. Click on Inactive to view the inactive stations, or All to view both inactive and active stations together. To filter your stations, enter all or part of the station's name or ID number and click Filter. These filters will remain as you navigate to different pages, so remember to click Clear Filters to view all the stations once again. Finally, on the right, we have the Station Details pane. Clicking on any station in the map or table will show you the information about that station in this pane. This includes station properties, including current status, location, and the landowner, the most recent deployment of that station, including antenna configurations, and then we have all the previous deployments listed under Deployment History. To add a new station, go to the top of the page, and in the View and Filters box, you'll see a button labeled Add a New Station. Clicking on this button, you'll be asked to enter the following information. The station's name. This should be based on a local name. The prospective start date. This is the date when the station is first deployed. If the station is already deployed, or it was deployed in the past, this should be the current date or a past date. If the station hasn't yet been deployed, enter the date you estimate to have it installed. If you do not have active plans to deploy a station here, leave this field blank. Next is the location. Here, you can drag the pin on the map to where you want to specify the location, or you can enter it in the input fields below the map. Afterwards, you have the comments. This is helpful for entering access notes to the station, or if the station is not yet installed, you may also describe your plans to install a station or just describe the location itself. The last piece that we need is the landowner. Here you can select one or more landowners from the list, or if you don't see the landowner that you want, you can click on Manage Your Project Landowners to add new landowners to the list. Once complete, click Save or Save Changes and exit. To terminate a deployment, use the map or table to select a station you wish to modify. In the Station Details pane on the right, click the button labeled Terminate this deployment. You'll be asked to provide a termination date and time in UTC. Once finished, click Terminate. To add a new deployment, use the map or table to select the station you wish to modify. In the Station Details pane on the right, click the button labeled Create a New Deployment. If a deployment already exists for that station, you'll be asked to terminate that deployment before creating a new one. However, if no active deployments exist, you'll be asked to enter the start date of the new deployment, as well as whether to copy over details from the previous deployment, including receiver and antenna configurations. In this example, I will not copy over any configuration from the previous deployment. Once complete, click Continue. Next, you will be asked to select the receiver for the station. Note that this step will be skipped if earlier you chose to use the same receiver from the previous deployment. To select a new receiver, look for it in the table and then click on Deploy this receiver. Note that receivers that are already deployed won't have this button present. This table has similar view and filter options to the main station management page. If you can't find the receiver you want, you may also add a new one by clicking on Add a Receiver button. You may also click on a row in the table to view the deployment history of that receiver. Once you find the correct receiver and click on the Deploy the Receiver button, you'll be prompted once again to confirm the start date and whether to copy over antenna details from the previous deployment. Click Confirm to continue. In this last step, you'll be asked to enter details about the antenna mounting structure and configuration. You're also provided with a space to add notes about the deployment, including visit details. The following information is required on this page. First, there's type. This essentially describes the antenna mounting structure. In most cases, stations are standalone structures or are attached to buildings. However, if you have a mobile receiver, in other words, on a vehicle or person, you can also select what it's attached to here. For those of us who are using the pop-up towers from Wade Antenna, you can click that here. Next are the antennas in the table at the bottom of the page. The following columns are required for each antenna. Dongle type. This is the radio device plugged into USB ports on certain receivers. There's one for each antenna. In most cases, when using the sensor gnome, we will use the FunCube Pro Plus. Next is the port number. This is very important because it ties the information that we get about antenna direction to the tag detections themselves. So if we want to get directional information from antennas, we need to make sure the port number is correct. Keep in mind that for CTT sensor stations, the built-in 434 MHz radios, they are labeled with the L prefix. Please see the Sensor Gnome guide and the Sensor Station guide for port numbering details. Next is the frequency of the antenna. In this case, we want to select 166.38. After that, we choose the antenna type. Here we're given a large list of different antenna models. Here we're using the 9-element Yagi layered PLC 1669. Following that, we need the direction of the antenna. We have the option to use the magnetic bearing or the true bearing. Magnetic bearing is any compass that does not have a declination. So this could be the compass on your phone or any compass with a declination set to 0. This is generally the one that we recommend you use because it is less prone to mistakes, especially when you're traveling. Also keep in mind that when you're taking your antenna directions in the field, try to stand a good distance away from the tower itself because this can affect your measurements. After that, we need the height of the antenna in meters. This is measured from the distance to the GPS itself. We gather the altitude using the GPS, so we want to know how high the antennas are from that GPS. Let me provide you with one more example. If we are to choose, say, an Omni antenna, and then from this type menu I choose the whip antenna or any of the others that say omnidirectional, the bearing in this case might not make much sense if the antenna is pointing upwards. So the number we enter here is not important. The height is still important, but next we want to do the angle of the antennas. And it's not present in this table, partly because it's not a common field. So what we first do, we want to save changes. We want to go back to the table, click Advanced Antenna Properties, and then we can choose the angle here. So if you hover over any of these question marks, it gives you a description of each one of these fields in case you have questions about it in the future. But essentially, this is the number of degrees above the horizontal. That means for the Omni antenna, that's in port 2, we want it to be at 90 degrees since it's pointing straight upwards. The other fields in this table are helpful to keep track of, but not necessary. You can also click on View Antenna Maps to verify the directions are accurate. Here we'll show you the approximate range of the antenna as well as the direction it's facing. If you wish to remove antenna, click one of these check boxes and click Save Changes. When we're finished, click Save Changes and exit. At any time, you can also go back to the deployment details by clicking on this button here in the information pane. This brings you back to the deployment page where you're able to enter notes and save those changes. You're also given the option to edit the deployment, but this is only to be used if there's a mistake that needs to be corrected. That is, if any changes occur at your station, this needs to be recorded in a new deployment. For instance, say I chose to switch the directions of my antenna. Instead of editing this deployment, I would go back to my stations page and then click Terminate this deployment. I would choose a date and time to terminate that deployment. And then I would create a new deployment. This time, the receiver has remained the same. However, we're changing the antenna configuration. So I'm going to uncheck this box. Now, a station deployment has been created. However, there's no antenna properties. Here, I can now add a new configuration. Once again, I can click View Antenna Map to verify that directions are accurate. And if I'm satisfied, I can click Save Changes and exit. We'll see here now we have multiple deployments. This is the one we just created here. And if we scroll up, we see the active, most recent deployment at the station includes the one with those 3 antennas that we just added. And we can also see that this previous deployment, if we click on this ID, it will show us that it has that one antenna. We're still able to modify the notes here if we choose to. To modify an existing station, locate the station on the map or table and click on that station. In the Station Details pane at the top, click on Modify Properties. Here, you can change the name, the location, add some comments, and change the landowner information. Please note that if you change the location of the station, it will change the location for all existing deployments of that station. If you move a station and you want to define a new location, we suggest you add a new station in that case. To view a list of receivers, click on Manage Your Receivers. Here we have the familiar list of receivers with their serial numbers and latest deployment dates, as well as their ID. Similar to the stations page, we have the filter options at the top, where we can enter the serial number of the receiver or its ID. If we click on any of the rows in the table, the receiver information will appear in the pane on the right. This includes the latest deployment, as well as its deployment history. There's also a link to the receiver timeline here. And that's basically it.